Whilst a fragile ceasefire seems to be holding in Gaza, the struggle for a free Palestine is far from over. Violence in the West Bank, Israeli bans on aid agencies, and American imperialism are just a few of the threats to the safety and flourishing of Palestinian communities. We are daily inspired by the determination, steadfastness, and persistence of Palestinians. Christians for Palestine continues to organise a Christian presence at the national marches for Palestine, as well as working locally in grassroots movements for change. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, or email christiansforpalestineuk@gmail.com to get involved.
Hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the UK-based leftist Christian podcast that believes consistent release schedules are a tool of capitalist oppression. I'm Ben Molyneux-Headington and I'm joined by Adam. Hey Adam, how you doing?
How you doing? Yeah, I'm all right.
Completely by accident there, I just didn't give you a surname.
I mean, it's probably safer that way these days, right?
But it feels like a real power play, particularly with the length of my name, to be like, I'm Ben Molyneux-Headington and this guy's just called Adam.
I'm so famous that I'm known by my first name alone.
Lenin,
I'm
Trotsky,
I'm
Stalin, Adam.
Beyonce.
What would you rather be compared to, Stalin or Beyonce? You know what? Don't answer that because either way, we're going to have angry fans. So,
Ben, you assume we have fans. I'm not sure we can.
Not fans of us. Angry fans of one of those two people is what I'm saying. Both the Beyonce stans and the Stalin stans scare me too much to take any risks.
Yeah. I'm 100% with you on that.
And we won't even make any jokes. We'll just move swiftly on to say it's been a little while since we've recorded. Sorry, everyone.
Welcome to season 6.
Yeah, as always, as is traditional, we have a break between seasons because we don't get around to recording anything. We did have plans to record stuff. Unfortunately, we're bad at plans, I guess, is the short answer. Things happen. Things got in the way.
It's almost like there's a bit of neurospiciness going on, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that. I hate that term, but we can talk about that. I mean, it's partially...
you know where it comes from.
Fucking TikTok is where it comes from.
That's
partly why I hate it. Like,
I mean, it doesn't.
It's an aesthetic preference as much as anything.
It's very popular on TikTok, I'll give you that, but it doesn't come from TikTok. It comes from the basically being told all the time that we have mild autism or severe autism, and of course that's an absolute nonsense. So autistics have started saying no, all autism is spicy, and that's what it's grown out of.
I hear that. Unfortunately, I think what it now is for people who are essentially neurotypical but occasionally have bad days, going, "Ooh, I'm a bit neurospicy. Shut up! No, you're not. Go away." But that's a hot take to start season 6.
Not seen that, and I fear we're going to have our fellow autistics coming after us now. We're just pissing off every possible group. Who can we go for next? Let's think. Oh, should we go for women next, Ben? That's your favourite topic, isn't it? You hate women, or maybe we could go for, I don't know. Do you know what? I'm going to get off this path because really dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, you've already accused me of being a misogynist there, like straight down the line.
I mean, put it past you.
I have nothing to say. No way. I should probably deny it strenuously, shouldn't I?
Probably. Yeah. Don't want this to turn into an Elon Musk moment, do we? Yeah, like, what's he doing? Like, he does a literal Nazi salute. Everyone's like, you're doing a Nazi salute.
Can I just be very, very clear that although you cannot see the video and Adam and I can see each other, I have not done any sort of salute at any point during it. In fact, my hands are firmly tucked into my hoodie pockets by coincidence, but they will fucking stay there now to avoid any accusations.
That was not my point. My point was that you're clearly a misogynist because you don't want to immediately deny being a misogynist when you're accused of it, much like how Elon Musk declined to say that he wasn't a Nazi, having just done a Nazi salute. And everyone's saying, it's a Nazi salute, what are you doing? And then his little stands online being like, oh, he was just giving people his heart or whatever. Like, give me strength.
Well, Adam, as you know, that's obviously not true because I am a male feminist, much like my heroes, David Cameron, Ed Miliband. So, mentioning Elon Musk, would you like to proceed to our usual opening segment, What Else is on My Mind, Grapes?
What else is on my mind, Grapes?
Yay. Let's talk about Nazis. All right. So there's a new president of the US, as anyone who doesn't live under a rock will be aware.
If this is how you get your news, then bit of an update.
So yeah. It's great to be like breaking that kind of news to people, isn't it? We could really go up in the world, couldn't we? There's a new president. He is even more far right this time round, it seems, than last time. Elon Musk is a little fascist crybaby, I guess.
He's a hanger-on. He is a pathetic weasel of a man, desperate for attention from the big dog. Don't like Elon Musk. I don't know if that's coming across. Not a big fan. Even prior to the Nazi salute, wasn't a big fan.
I mean, he was already a Nazi, wasn't he? Like, or a fascist at least. Like, there's enough evidence at this point.
Maybe
he's quite litigious as well, though. So allegedly,
but I also think the Musk salute, and this is actually what we want to talk about, so we won't go into it in too much depth. But it represents a fundamentally socially awkward man. I think he has said in the past. I think he identifies some with Asperger's. I don't know exactly.
He is. He is autistic. Yeah.
I think he's actually used the term Asperger's, which doesn't help the Nazi accusations.
Well,
Google that if you'd like. The point of a lot of the kind of super online far right stuff that Musk is attracted to, has found himself delving in, is plausible deniability. I think what Elon Musk has done there is really misjudged the plausible deniability of doing an actual Nazi salute. He's trying to do the whole like, oh, well, if you think that's what it is, it probably says more about you, but accidentally did the full Nazi salute, rather than something a little bit more deniable that, you know, you can pass off as trolling or whatever, which is the kind of, you know, the way they do things, right? Is oh, you're offended by that? Well, just trolling. When actually the message is, I'm really doing that. This is probably a little bit too far to get away with that playbook.
I mean, like, yeah, and also it's really important to recognize that if someone is openly doing Nazi salutes at a right-wing political rally, and by the way, like shortly after that, went via video link and appeared at the AfD rally in Germany. So it's not a great look, is it? But the point is that if you're openly doing Nazi salute at right-wing rallies, then like, what's the distinction between you and an actual Nazi? I don't care what is actually in your head. I care about what you're doing in the streets.
Mm-hmm. I was just trying to, I don't disagree with that. I think I'm just trying to recognize that he is not, that was not Elon Musk saying, I am a Nazi. That doesn't mean he's not some sort of fascist.
Yeah, sure.
But actually, what he's trying to do there is do the kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, oh, I'm trolling, or want you liberals upset. Ha ha ha, fascist iconography, but not really, but maybe really, but not really,
which,
but
like,
a little bit really.
Which, like, let's be honest, that's exactly what friend of the pod, Calvin Robinson, was doing.
exactly what we wanted to talk about. So some of you may well remember esteemed friend of the pod, Calvin Robinson, IT teacher extraordinaire, who
4-time priest.
Yeah,
who can honestly say they're 4-time priest?
Yeah, some sort of Uber priest now. So,
but not in the bishop sense. Not in the bishop sense.
No, he did the thing where he was training to be a vicar in the Church of England, and he got to the end of training, and the Diocese of London went, "Oh, we can't really find anywhere for you."
No!
Oh
what
no!
We do?
And it's difficult because that's absolutely a thing the Church of England do as a way
can attest to that. Well, actually, no, they didn't even do that with me. I didn't even get that far.
So this is absolutely a tool the Church of England use when, as part of control and the way they frankly spiritually abuse people, particularly in the process of training to be a priest.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be too up on the fact that this is what happened to him. Like he's not wrong to say this is bullshit. It was about his politics and the way he was going on in public, but also he was publicly espousing far-right politics. He shouldn't have been made any sort of vicar.
I mean, I think this is the thing as well. It's like the Church of England, they might have seen this. Well, clearly they did see all this and go, "Oh, I'm not sure we can, ordain this guy."
Correctly,
but be open about why.
No,
you should be able to say you shouldn't be a priest if you're far right. Like that should be a thing.
Yeah, it should be a fairly obvious thing, you'd think. But anyway, he then bounced around some other like smaller denominations with Anglican history. He ended up in the Anglican Catholic Communion.
Yeah, I think that was right. Yeah.
Which is basically a bunch of Anglicans who left the American Anglican Church once they had let women become priests.
I thought it was. I don't think it was them. I think it's a smaller one than them. They're quite big, those ones.
And there's a bunch of those ones.
Yeah, totally, but not like the big one.
Not the big one of a bunch of denominations sprung up essentially for people who wouldn't accept that the American Anglicans were going to allow women priests, and more generally about the vaguely liberal direction in which American Anglicanism. Can't believe I screwed pronouncing that up, mainly because I'm avoiding trying to say Episcopalian because it's difficult to pronounce, and I still screwed up Anglicanism. So he's ended up at this relatively small church, and I have a slight bone to pick because I think a few people have referred to him as a fake priest. And
yeah, but it is quite funny. I mean, we did a thing on that before, didn't we? Where it was like, you're not a real vicar, didn't people chanting at him, didn't we?
Yeah, which, I don't know, like, if you're a hardcore Anglican or even a Catholic, like, crack on by all means, but for the rest of us...
Can I just guess? Can I just guess what your objection is going to be?
Yeah.
Well, every priest is a fake.
No, not... Well...
Oh, really?
Whatever.
Wow.
Like, I mean, yeah, fake is not... But, like, if you are not a committed, like, hardline Anglican or Catholic or whatever on this stuff, on what basis is that denomination any less legitimate than any other ordaining denomination, right? Like they claim apostolic succession, they've got an organization, and they have congregations. Like, why can they not call someone a priest? Like, essentially, don't be such a non-Protestant about these things, is my argument. Like, if they say he's a priest, he's a priest. He's just a shit priest and a dickhead. But, arguably they're too unnecessary words in that centre.
Oh dear. But I think this is the thing though. Being a priest does not mean that you are any less of a dickhead, as you put it. Mm-hmm. Just as being a Christian doesn't mean you're any less of a dickhead, and we can see that with Calvin Robinson's wanting to kind of move us along a little bit. With Calvin Robinson also doing a Nazi salute. Again, I think, in that sort of I'm just trolling kind of way.
but with a level of irony added, right?
Because he knows exactly what he's doing. Like, yeah,
he's specifically referencing Elon Musk doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
He says the same thing and does it. It's very much a ha ha ha. Look at me, aren't I cheeky? Like, you're a middle-aged man, dude. Like, you're not a 50-year-old online.
Calvin Robinson.
He's older than you think he is.
I don't think he's that old, though, is he?
How much of this, Adam, is because he's a similar age to you and you're upset that you're a middle-aged man?
I'm not a middle-aged man. Give me strength. He's 39.
It's 39. I would say that's pushing middle age, definitely. Your midlife crisis is when you turn 40, traditionally. I'm just saying, like, this is like...
Can you fuck off?
No, Adam, your midlife crisis is when you were 21. Let's not lie. You're not making it to 80.
Right. Okay, Wikipedia says the term is commonly used to denote the age range from around 45 to around 65. So do one. Oh, damn. And then it says... can be defined as a type? No, I'm not going to read that bit. Move on.
So yeah, he's doing it with like an ironic twist, and the reason I bring up that he's a middle-aged man is that this is the sort of thing that I didn't do Nazi salutes. Let's be clear, but as an edgy teenager, you might be like, "Oh, I'm going to say an offensive word," or look at me, I'm being so clever because I'm doing something that people are going to. Yeah. But like, even in your early 20s, you're starting to be like, "Come on, like, you should be beyond this. Like, grow up." Like, 39, doing edgy jokes to impress an audience of incels on the internet is, yeah,
exactly. So, but I think this is the thing, right? So I wanted to talk about this briefly, but I also kind of wanted to talk more generally about how we are, one of the hallmarks of fascism is to use, in this case, Christianity and very often Christianity, but whatever the sort of dominant religion is in the area that fascism is predominating, and to use that for fascism's own gain, basically. And so we are seeing a lot more of this. I never thought I would have at least an element of agreement with Rory Stewart, but he's got into a Twitter argument with JD Vance on this concept of ordo amoris. JD Vance arguing that basically there are orders of love, and that we should love those closest to us first, and then those in our nation, and then those outside. And he uses that to justify just awful fascist policies, nasty anti-immigrant stuff, deportations, that kind of thing, right? And he tells people to Google ordo amoris. Now, ordo amoris is a concept found in St. Augustine's City of God, chapter 15, I think, or book 15, and it does not mean what JD Vance thinks it means. Now, I don't think Rory Stewart has sort of responded in that way, saying you don't know what ordo amoris is. But Rory Stewart is broadly correct when he says this is nonsense, basically, that Jesus calls us to love everyone. Now, I might make the argument that perhaps Rory Stewart's party and his politics doesn't show that very well. Yeah. But at least he's right in the basics, JD Vance is wrong in the basics, because ordo amoris is not about that. It is about things being loved in their right ways. Okay, so it's not about having an order of we love these people more than these people more than these people. No, it's about loving people the right way, for each kind of person. Right, and that does not mean that we get to like deport people en masse and stick people in cages, that kind of thing. I think finally, one thing I would say is it's also important to recognise that if we truly love everyone, as Rory Stewart says we should, there are, I think Ordo Amoris would suggest that there are ways to love a rich person that some people might not see as particularly loving, even if I would argue that they are. And there are ways to love a poor person that give preference to that person. Okay, so that's where there might be some level of distinction, differentiation there. So they're both wrong. Rory Stewart has a little bit of right about him as well. I mean, J.D. Vance has a lot of right about him, if we're talking politics, but not that kind of right. So, yeah. But we're going to see a lot more of this as we go forward. There's, fascism is
Absolutely.
here. And we need to make sure that we are clued in on things like this and go to self-defense classes. That's what I'm going to say.
That is bold, but yeah, sure. let's roll with it. To end our story on a positive note, our good friend Calvin Robinson has been kicked out of that church. As you mentioned, that was his fourth church.
Sorry, I thought I needed a correct ding. Yeah, or maybe it should have been.
The church has put out a statement which basically says, "You're here to be a priest, not a political commentator." Why, and saying there's a pattern of stuff that predates this as well that's led to him.
They've been pretty overt about it as well, though. Like, I mean, they didn't quite call him a Nazi, but they did kind of say, like, you shouldn't be doing Nazi shit. And I kind of respect that, like, it's pretty basic, but a lot of organizations wouldn't do that. So,
and particularly because, of course, this is a very conservative. I'm not saying they're Nazis, but this is an extremely conservative church. Well, extremely conservative church that, has booted him out. So, fantastic news. Yeah. He is free to get another job as a priest in another church. But frankly, he's running out of churches that have enough money to employ him. He's kind of failed as a political commentator. He never really got off the ground in the way that he wanted to. So maybe he'll have to get a real job and sort his life out at some point. Good luck to him.
The thing is, like, the thing about that is that he's just really annoying. Like, he's just really grating.
Yeah. He's not a natural, unlike us, broadcasters extraordinaire.
That's why we have thousands and thousands of listeners.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying we're brilliant at this. I'm saying if we had the infrastructure money behind us that Robinson's efforts did, we'd do a better job.
Mate, if I win the lottery, having never played it, we're going stratospheric, mate,
I don't know what that means. I'm not sure I want to know. To be honest, it probably mainly involves just hiring someone to, like, do organizational shit for us, right? Like,
yeah, literally. A PA.
So, would you like to move on to today's main topic?
Go on in.
We're going to talk about some more good friends of the podcast, the Evangelical Alliance. For those of you who haven't heard of the Evangelical Alliance, well done, congratulations, beautiful life. Maybe switch off the episode. I honestly don't think there's a know your enemy element, but really, if you live in a world where you don't know who the Evangelical Alliance are, I envy you. If you, like Adam or I, have grown up in any proximity to the Evangelical Church in the UK, and to be honest, to most of the church in the UK, Evangelical or otherwise,
you're going to know who they are, aren't you?
You're going to know who they are. They're a fairly big deal. They are the main kind of mass evangelical organization in the country, comprising evangelicals from kind of Anglican evangelicals to Pentecostal, charismatic, kind of the whole spectrum of evangelicalism in the country. and we don't like them very much, I'm afraid to tell you. This is one of the types of episodes we do where we do a deep dive into a particular organisation, group or movement. I spend a lot of time on the Charity Commission website reading things that alternate between being exceptionally boring and exceptionally annoying. So you're welcome. I think the first thing to say about the Evangelical Alliance is that on paper, compared to some of the people and organisations we've tackled previously, they're not as bad or as dangerous. You know, compared to the Christian Legal Centre, who are a really dangerous kind of, can I say extremist organisation without getting sued?
Yeah.
Or the Wall of Unanswered Prayer, where there's a bunch of like stuff that was underneath it, and it was linked to kind of politicians and also possibly some dodgy accounting. Go back and listen to that episode, by the way. I think it's the only time we've genuinely broken a story on this podcast.
That's true.
If you haven't heard it, I managed to find some financial irregularities with the Wall of Answered Prayer. And that was really early in the podcast, so if you're relatively new, that's an interesting
like
episode.
Our first episode or something, I think. We peaked very early, that's all I'm going to say.
I think I can talk about this now. It's been a while. I happen to know that as a result of that episode, the bloke who set it up got his book deal cancelled because he was turned out that he was quite dodgy. So that's
did that go through? Did that actually?
Yeah. That's not public information. I don't know if I really should say that, but I'm saying it. So crack on.
Well,
Having said all that, the Evangelical Alliance are definitely a bad organisation. They're actually quite dangerous. And I think for two reasons, they're in some ways more dangerous than some of those organisations like the Christian Legal Centre. The first is they're a lot bigger and better funded and more able to get stuff done. The nicest thing I can say about the Christian Legal Centre is that they do exceptionally efficient work in generating publicity for a quite small organisation.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas Evangelical Alliance are much bigger, they have the infrastructure to do a lot more. And they also have the veneer of acceptability and respectability that allows them to push what are, at a fundamental level, fairly similar ideological beliefs to the Christian Legal Centre, but in ways that feel more acceptable to the world at large.
I think I would say, in some respects, that's true. There are certainly ideological commitments that they share with the Christian Legal Centre, and there is a lot of overlap there. But I think a lot of it is single issue stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where I think they're actually really quite dangerous is that they're just really quite a liberal kind of organisation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not dissimilar to a lot of sort of religious and even sort of societal sort of community organizations that have a lot to do with the political sphere. So I don't know, but I imagine their offices are in London.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Really enjoyably, I think they're London, Edinburgh, Belfast, and Stockport, because presumably they ran out of money for their final location.
Stockport, fair enough. I quite like Stockport as a place.
Yeah. But it's like capital, like Stockport. That's where they put the people that don't have any kind of need to be in London, and they can spend a lot less money.
A lot of stuff is going to Greater Manchester, though.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of organisations, yeah.
Anyway, that is the big take. Evangelical Alliance, a fundamentally liberal organisation, a bold assertion that by the end of this episode, I hope we're going to prove. Before we get to that, let me just introduce the Evangelical Alliance a little bit for you. So, it's founded in 1846 to promote evangelical Christianity, and its official charitable aim is to advance the evangelical Christian faith in all parts of the world. And then on their website, they say the Evangelical Alliance is made up of hundreds of organizations, thousands of churches, and tens of thousands of individuals joined together for the sake of the gospel. The Evangelical Alliance is the oldest and largest evangelical unity movement in the UK. United in mission and voice, we exist to serve and strengthen the work of the church, read the Evangelical Church, in our communities and throughout society. Highlighting the significant opportunities and challenges facing the church today, we work together to resource Christians so they're able to act upon their faith in Jesus, to speak up for the gospel, justice, and freedom in their areas of influence. So that's kind of what they say. I think there's a lot of kind of if you know language in there. My take on this is that evangelicalism is kind of three related but distinct things. It's a theological approach, it's a culture, and it's an economic or like a marketing category. So there's evangelical theology. That's kind of something that's been, like a lot of definitions of theology, there's always a flux and debate over what it kind of talks about, but focus on the cross in some form, focus on winning people over to Christianity, focus on kind of works in the, coming out of faith in the world, infallibility or inerrancy or some sort of high scripture view.
I don't like calling it high. I get what you mean, but to me, it feels very low to treat scripture as something that it's not. If I'm going to be respectful of scripture, then I have to take it for what it is. And that to me feels like a much higher way of treating scripture. But I get what you mean, and that is how people use it. It's always bothered me,
So to put it better way, they have a very high view of the roughly 60% of scripture they bother to read. Because, as you say, there's whole books of the Bible that you can't read and hold to any sort of inerrancy, infallibility, like they just skip past, like, or ignore or explain away bunches of it. Anyway, there's that kind of theological approach. But then there is a culture of evangelicalism. I mean, at its very basic level, that's a type of like church service. Maybe you have contemporary worship music, someone playing an acoustic guitar, 4 chords, Jesus is my boyfriend, all this sort of stuff that if you've knocked around long enough, you've heard these phrases.
I'm not convinced by this. Okay, I think the thing is, a lot of the time, these things have become synonymous, right? Like they're often, if you walk into an evangelical church, that is what you will find, but they're not the same thing. And there's still a lot of evangelical churches that are, hymns and organs, ladies in hats, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important. Like, to me, I agree that there's a cultural thing and a cultural element, but it wouldn't be like you go to church service and they play guitar kind of thing that would be the predominant way that now there is that is often a thing that comes alongside it, but it isn't it isn't an inherent part of it. It's not a necessary ingredient, and B, it doesn't actually come out of evangelicalism as such sort of originally. But there's a lot of crossover though.
So what I'm saying is, I agree with you that what you might call an evangelical culture and evangelical theology do not have to be shared. There's also, and we won't really get into this, but evangelical is also a marketing category, less so in the UK, but to some extent, particularly in the States, there are a group of people you sell certain things to. Particularly focusing on those first two, I agree with you. Those don't necessarily have to be the same thing. You can absolutely have the theology about the culture without theology. I put it to you that one of the evangelical, or probably the key purpose of the Evangelical Alliance, is to make those two things as inseparable as possible. To say, if you like someone playing an acoustic guitar, maybe more casual, low church, whatever you're going to call it, that sort of thing. If you like longer preaches where someone emphasizes that biblical story, you therefore should have this theology, that there is no distinction between an evangelical culture and an evangelical theology. And I think that is the fundamental purpose of the Evangelical Alliance. I think secondarily to that, and kind of related because it reinforces it, they look to push an agenda that matches their theological agenda. But I think their primary function is to enforce a certain boundary around what evangelicalism is. Have I compelled you with my argument?
Maybe we'll see. We'll see how it. We'll see how it pans out, shall we?
Let's talk about Steve Chalk, because Steve Chalk.
That's a rhyme. That's a nice rhyme. I like that.
Thank you. It's someone we've mentioned before, Steve Chalk. He is a Baptist minister who is the head honcho of Oasis, which is a kind of, I think there's a number of Oasis things now. A church, multiple churches, I think, at this point, kind of runs academies, charitable organizations, loads of stuff.
Community hubs, that kind of thing.
We have our criticisms of Chalk and Oasis that I think we've mentioned before. We're not going to go into now, but their kind of brand, if you will, is liberal evangelical, progressive evangelical. So
yeah, they're like, I mean, they're fine. You know, like,
yeah.
They're not. I'm not expecting radicalism from them, and I'm not getting it right. But they're
better than like so many churches in the country.
I think they're decent, well-meaning people for the most part, who need to be won for Christ in actuality.
Oh, God damn you! I hate that so much. God. Look, it's a church you can go to where they are vocally not homophobic or transphobic. That's pretty good going. Like, we're going to take what we can get sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Steve Chalk caught us some controversy in the kind of 2010s and before that a little bit. First thing he did was reject substitutionary atonement, which is a theory of why Jesus died on the cross. That is often seen as central to evangelicalism. There's, it's not universally seen as that, but a lot of the time that's seen as the main way in which atonement theory, as you'd call it, is taught. We won't go into that in any depth, but there was a lot of upset about it. But the Evangelical Alliance actually organised a kind of academic conference, released a book with chats of different people debating the atonement. Then he did an article kind of suggesting that he wasn't keen on biblical inerrancy or infallibility. Again, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of debate. People are very upset. He remained, and Oasis as a church remained part of the Evangelical Alliance. Both of those things I've just mentioned are directly mentioned in the basis of faith you are asked to sign to become a member of the Evangelical Alliance. But twice he was able to propose views that contradicted the basis of faith without Oasis being thrown out of the Evangelical Alliance. Then Oasis announced that they were affirming of same-sex marriages. And Chalk kind of did a bunch of media. It was quite, at the time, I think it was 2014, so it was quite a prominent, it was a major figure within, at the time, what was seen as UK evangelicalism, kind of announcing, not before time, in all fairness, but still was one of the first in what you would call evangelicalism to go on record and say we would marry gay people. I will say that the theology they espoused was deeply conservative. It was monogamous, committed, long-term gay relationships are fine with us, which is, just about the most conservative affirmation of gay rights that it's possible to imagine. But nonetheless, it was enough to get Oasis thrown out of the Evangelical Alliance. Now, same-sex marriage is not mentioned anywhere in the statement of faith that you have to sign to join the Evangelical Alliance. So I think it's quite revealing. That's what got thrown out, not the actual contradictions of what they claim is the basis of faith for the alliance, but the support for same-sex marriage. Officially, it's because Oasis refused to essentially. The Evangelical Alliance is fine if you must, but you've got to publish some homophobic content alongside it as well. And they were like, "Yeah, we're not going to do that. That would be really weird." I think, for me, I know a lot of this comes down to money, if we're being brutally honest, because the reality is people get upset when you question substitutionary atonement. They get upset when you question biblical infallibility. They stop giving money when you support gay people, which is awful, obviously, and a terrible indictment of those people. But if the Evangelical Alliance had been seen in any way to support or even permit any sort of affirming theology, they would have lost a shitload of money. And I think that is what it comes down to. But I also think it's about boundary maintenance again. There are things that you can push against that, and a lot of evangelicals will be upset to hear me say this, but fundamentally, theological propositions like substitutionary atonement and biblical infallibility aren't that fundamental to evangelicalism.
Yeah.
But the Evangelical Alliance believes that opposition to same-sex marriage is fundamental to that. Yeah. And therefore, Oasis had to go. Steve Chalk had to go.
Yeah, it says a lot about the actual kind of positions, the actual ideological positions of this group and other groups, that is what gets you thrown out. It's not the actual stuff that we consider foundational in it. And actually, what we've seen now is a lot of groups like the Evangelical Alliance. I thought they had done this for a bit, but I see no evidence of it. But a lot of groups like the Evangelical Alliance have started putting in clauses, rewriting their basis of faith and membership and that kind of thing, to include a section on LGBTQ plus stuff, right?
So I think the Evangelical Alliance are less honest about this, in that to join, you have to go through a vetting process.
Yeah.
As churches and organisations do. And I think the answer is that even if you can demonstrate you believe in all the tenets of the basis of faith which you've signed and sent off or whatever, and done all the work on whatever, if they find out the LGBTQ affirming, they will deny your application. I think it's that. Yeah. I don't think they're particularly open about it, but I suspect that everyone knows what the deal is.
Yeah. Yeah. The incredible thing about them as well is that they do make a big song and a dance about how they are actually not homophobic. They've got this whole welcoming people thing, a welcome network.
We've been over this so many times. The absolute classic.
Yeah.
You know, we love gay people, but we do want to deprive them of the same rights that the rest of us have.
Yeah. So they will always put on a song and dance about it, but actually scratch beneath the surface, and you find the same old thing.
A real watchword. I read through a bunch of their publications, and particularly their annual report from last year. Real watchword for them is unity. They want you to know how keen they are on kind of race equality. And I think they have done a lot of work around that. I think there's a self-serving element, which is that evangelical Christianity in the UK is looking less and less white every year. That is just the nature of it with the immigration that's coming in. You're getting, people particularly from Africa, but from other places as well, coming in and being evangelical Christians. There was, in the history of the Evangelical Alliance, there was a bit of some evangelicals didn't want the Pentecostals in, and there was a bit of a fight over that, but in the end, Pentecostalism was kind of subsumed into the Evangelical Alliance, which I think is interesting and noteworthy. It's something we spoke about ages ago with Anthony Reddy, where we discussed the massive difference where there is no kind of progressive Pentecostalism in the UK, really, not in any major way, that it's all very conservative. And I think the Evangelical Alliance successfully subsumed Pentecostalism into its stuff.
I think that's true, but it's also important to recognise that a lot of that happened in the US as well, right? So it happened before it sort of got exported over here, where a lot of white racists couldn't deal with the fact that Pentecostalism was a black and equal movement, and so they started their own own form of Pentecostalism.
So, small props. As I say, I think it's a lot of self-preservation in there, but they have done a lot of work on the kind of racial equality stuff. But I think the language of unity is really interesting. They talk about church unity, but you don't boot out people with very different views of you if you're looking to do church unity, right? This is not about the entire universal church in the UK being united together. Unity is about power, because the more people you have, the more power you have, right? In the most simple way, because the more money you get in and the more things you can spend it on, but also you can claim to be speaking, as they make a big deal of this huge community of churches and organizations and individuals. But unity here is about, we need as many people as possible who we can get to agree with us. It's boundary maintenance, as you said again. It's about drawing a very clear boundary of, we want this to have as many people as possible, as long as they are on board with what we want to do.
But it's also about maintaining the status quo politically more broadly as well, right? Because you don't see a whole lot from them, as far as I could be wrong, correct me if you've found stuff, but I don't see a great deal of them when they're talking about things like Black Lives Matter and racial justice and that kind of thing. Actually talking about the systemic issues, and that we actually need a radical.
And to be clear, that when I say racial justice, I don't mean racial justice. I don't think I said justice. I said equality, and it's a very conservative form of racial equality.
Yeah.
It is. Do not be thinking that they're out here supporting Black Lives Matter. I'm not giving them any props here.
No, but it's the same. It's the same kind of thinking with. Perhaps a bit better in a sense, but it's the same kind of thinking that we've already spoken about in terms of like same-sex marriage and that kind of thing, is that they will say that they are inclusive and but actually what that means is we want to include people, we want people to agree with us and come into the fold, rather than questioning what that fold actually is.
So, would you like to hear about some money?
Is it coming my way? Because yes.
No, I apologise. Oh. I misled you here. I tell you that you are very low on the list of people who are getting money from the Evangelical Alliance, Adam.
That's what they think.
So, I went through their financial report from the last financial year because I'm a very boring person. Here are some headlines.
That was fun. Yeah.
Expenditure of just shy of £3 million, which is a decent chunk, obviously, but puts them very firmly in that kind of medium size.
Less than I thought it would be, though.
Yeah, I think there is a network of very closely related organisations where actually the Evangelical Alliance don't touch some stuff. Obviously, like your Youth for Christ does everything with Evangelical Alliance doesn't really touch kids at all. No, that's not a sentence I was going to say.
Thank God.
I'm not prepared to claim.
I was going to say.
The Evangelical Alliance doesn't really do anything around children and young people, and they don't do universities because they've got the UCCF Christian Union stuff.
Who we will cover at some point. That'll be fun.
And there's groups like CARE and Tear Fund as well, who sprang out of the Evangelical Alliance. They try and distance themselves a little bit, but Tear Fund is a much more conservative organisation than you realise.
Particularly than some people realise. I know it, I can tell you.
Particularly in the way they work in the UK, they work with almost any churches. They do good stuff, and there's some positive stuff out of Tear Fund.
Sure.
Abroad, they work exclusively with the evangelical churches. They are really quite conservative outside of the borders of the UK.
Well, because actually, who is funding them, and who are they doing work with? Right, they're being funded by churches in the UK to do work abroad.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Anyway, so there's a bunch of kind of interrelated organisations that kind of make up this kind of I don't really call this kind of complex of organisations that make up the kind of formal evangelicalism in the UK. Evangelical Alliance is but one of them. And they're kind of a small to medium-sized organisation. They're not a huge one, but they're certainly not a little local charity. They are a national organisation. Most of their money comes from donations, churches, individuals, other groups. £3 a month to be a member as an individual.
Oh, wow! I might sign you up.
If you're a church, it's £1 per member, per adult member per year, minimum of £90 a year. And then organisations, they cost between £85 and £275, depending on your turnover. This is cheap. This is cheap as chips, particularly for the churches and organisations. And I think that's a big part. I think that's a very intentional thing on their behalf. They want the barrier to entry to be an official Evangelical Alliance member to be as low as possible. Again, because they're looking to have this broad base of people that they can then kind of control the narrative around what these people believe. And I suspect there are churches where potentially you've got one or two people in charge who are hardline evangelicals, or very much like we're putting it in, or at some point they've been a member of the Alliance and it's just kind of kept on, where the majority of the congregation don't realise that they are officially Evangelical Alliance members, right? Because it's chump change, If you're spending like 90 quid a year on this, it barely shows up in the accounting, right? For a church or an organisation, even the tiniest churches, right? That is not money that you're going to notice. So I think it's a very clear tactic. As I said earlier, if you apply, you do get vetted as a church and organisation. Yeah. So they make sure that you're not some cheeky liberal church trying to sneak in or anything like that. So there is a bit of kind of back and forth around that, but they do make it easy to be there. Of that, just under 3 million in expenditure, just over 2 million of that is on staffing costs, which is about right. Most organisations, 70% on staffing is about right. They've got an average of 50 staff members, although not all of those are full-time. The top earner, we're going to assume, I think, reasonably, that is the CEO, Gavin Calver, earns between 80 and 90k. I have met Gavin Calver when I was a teenager at a thing. He was very nice to me. He prayed over me and prophesied that I would be a leader in the church, to which I say, lol, we'll chalk that one up as a miss, Gavin. That's or potentially Bread and Rosaries, the podcast ordained by prophecy.
That should be our tagline. Gavin Calver.
I don't think he'd back himself on that one in retrospect. I think maybe he saw a middle class white man or white boy with some level of intelligence and a bit of confidence about him, and somehow thought, I reckon this guy might be a church leader someday. Who knows why he thought that?
No, I to be honest, I am now going to put like the tagline as Bread and Rosaries, backed
ordained
by the
by
Evangelical Alliance. Yeah. The militant wing of the Evangelical Alliance.
He earns between 80 and 90k, which, just for a bit of colour and shade, is roughly equivalent to what the Archbishop of Canterbury earns. So that's I don't know if that's how he sees himself, but yeah. There's two more staff that earn between 60 and 70k, which is kind of the level at which you have to announce. There are 8 people on the leadership team. Kind of total expenditure on them was a bit over 600k, which is roughly 30% of staff expenditure on 8 people in an organisation of around 50. That is pretty normal. It's very much not kingdom values, to use the sort of language they'd like.
Kingdom values, yeah.
Doesn't reflect to me.
It's a kingdom value.
Well, yeah. But I don't think we can do critical, because that is what a medium-sized charity would expect to look like. I do think that, unfortunately, medium and small charities do pay shit money to the lower-ranking employees. So, and I think they're probably doing that, but that is the norm. So, Gavin Calver, the CEO, a true Nepo baby. His dad and his granddad both previously headed up the Evangelical Alliance.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That you don't kind of you.
It appears to be a inherited position.
Yeah.
The monarchy and being the head of the Evangelical Alliance goes down through bloodlines.
Yeah. I was going to say you see it in like in like film industry or and obviously with like just rich people in general, I guess. But I was going to say you don't kind of expect it with something like the Evangelical Alliance, but then like loads of evangelical churches do.
Yeah.
That's pretty normal.
He was also previously in charge of Youth for Christ, an organisation his dad was previously in charge of.
Wow. I wonder if I could get a job for the same factory my dad worked for 15 years.
I think it reflects a kind of bluntly incestuous, closed culture, right? I don't think it's, occasionally churches get it bits of it, but I don't think it's that common for it to pass down through generations of family. But I think there is an insiders club, often an old boys network, and even now it is an old boys network a lot of the time. You need to be on the inside, and it's possible to get on the inside, but it's much easier to already be in.
It's also why you can never expect them to actually come up with anything vaguely radical, why they are never going to question the way things are, because fundamentally it's run by people who are quite happy with the way things are, broadly speaking. Like they might, again, typical thing of might like some tinkering around the edges, but that's their whole point. Their whole point is this kind of liberal thing, again, of being involved in the political sphere. And what they mean by that is, parliamentary politics, having a say in the decisions that are made in the halls of power. Rather than, any actual critique of power as a concept or anything like that.
Speaking of having a say in the halls of power, I just want to introduce you to one more person to give you a sense of the Evangelical Alliance. Her name is Fiona Bruce. She is not a newsreader for the BBC, so don't get it twisted. I do not want to...
I got so excited there for like this amazing connection. Yeah,
Fiona Bruce is now a former MP, Tory MP, and continues to be a council member for the Evangelical Alliance. The way it works is that they have a big council. I think there's like 30 or something people on there that then elect trustees. So the council is kind of the kind of broad oversight and direction setting. They kind of run the organisation on a big picture level. She is a member of the council. I believe previously mentioned Stephen Timms, the Labour MP, who we have discussed before and been not very nice to because he's a homophobe, was also on this thing. So it's not just Tories, but that's
debatable, isn't
it? In the last Parliament, she had the dubious distinction of being the fourth highest earner for outside income. So top three were Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and and Sir Geoffrey Cox. So that's two ex-prime ministers, and Geoffrey Cox was the Attorney General and was still serving as a King's Counsel, kind of bringing in money, doing that. She was fourth on the list because she continued to run her solicitor's agency while being an MP. Raking the money from that. She was extremely clear that her priority in Parliament was restricting abortion rights. She has worked with the ADF, which is an American organisation that we've mentioned before that works to basically push the religious rights agenda. It's kind of a far-right Christian organisation that was quite heavily involved in the anti-abortion stuff in the UK. I suspect, I haven't looked into it yet, I suspect you scratch the anti-assisted dying campaign and you'll find ADF money behind it in the UK as well. But we might do an episode on that at some point. I might do some digging. But yeah, she's kind of spoken at events, got in a bit of trouble a couple of times for it. But I think, she barely turned up to Parliament apart from to push her very specific agenda, particularly around abortion. And I think she kind of represents the purest, most unobscured version of what the Evangelical Alliance does in terms of its relationship with power, which is that it desperately scrambles for as much power as possible in order to push its very specific agenda. And this is not someone who was just a member of the Evangelical Alliance. She is on the council. Like, she's heavily involved. The reason I bring up the earning outside of Parliament is the reason she earned that money is because she was kind of half-arsing, part-timing being an MP, because she only really wanted to be there, not to do any sort of, political work in any real sense, but to push a few narrow bits of her agenda.
But Ben, I think we've both been told many, many times that it's really important that we get more and more Christians into positions of power.
Yeah, well, that is definitely on the Evangelical Alliance's radar. In a moment, I'm going to tell you a bit more about what they do. But before we do that, Adam, I believe you have a Saint of the Week for me.
Saint of the Week.
I do, and I've been looking forward to this one for some time. I've struggled to justify making this person a Saint of the Week because how can what?
I'm already worried.
You shouldn't, because this guy is hilarious.
Is it a human being?
Yes, it is this time a human being.
Well, that's
an
a start.
Actual human being who actually existed, and an actual saint.
Okay, well, I'm less convinced. Go on.
But this is from the time when people who were sainted from that period were actually Christian. So we're talking about a 4th century bandit who became a monk.
Oh, okay. Disappointing. I thought he was going to carry on being a bandit.
Well, actually, I could do better than that. A 4th century slave who became a bandit who became a monk.
Real downgrade at the end there.
Yeah. So we're talking about one of my favourite saints, Saint Moses the Black.
Cracking name. Love that name.
I know. In fact, a cracking name, also known as Moses the Strong, Moses the Robber, and Moses the Ethiopian. So take your pick. But Moses the Black, I think, is
great
badass,
stuff all round.
Yeah. He's one of my favourites because basically he started out life as a slave to a government official, I think in like Egypt, but he himself was Ethiopian, and probably Ethiopian. But he was basically kicked out of the slaver's household for being too violent.
Cool.
And I'm like, that is. I mean, obviously, slavery has looked different across different times and places, but yeah, that is one way to do it in certain circumstances. So good for him. He then joined a gang of robbers, bandits, and basically terrorized and looted the Nile Valley. There's a hilarious story where basically a barking dog stopped Moses from carrying out a robbery. So the story goes that basically he swore vengeance on the owner, right? And what he does is he goes back, and by the way, to commit this robbery, he had to swim across the Nile, which is not a small feat. At this time, the Nile has crocodiles, big ones. And anyway, so he puts his sword in his mouth, swims the Nile, and this barking dog stops him doing it. So then he goes and tries again, but the owner of the dog has got wind of the fact that Moses is coming back to have another go and has managed to hide. So Moses has stolen 4 of his sheep, right? And then taken them to market and sold their fleece, or exchanged their fleece for wine.
Strong. Yeah.
Yeah. And all the time, like, he's going backwards and forwards, swimming the Nile with the sword in his mouth, by the way. And then, anyway, after this, the authorities are looking for him. You know, it's getting a bit hot, so he goes to a desert in northern Egypt, which I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of. It's called Wadi el Natron, which was then called, I think, Cetis or Cetis, and there's a monastic community there. And he goes there and he stays with this monastic community just until, you know, the heat kind of dies down. However, whilst he's there, he basically converts to Christianity because he sees the ways of these brothers who care for each other so deeply and care for the poor and all the rest of it. And he's like, this is pretty cool. And so he joins that community, but he really struggles adjusting, right? Because, like,
understandably,
like, his life up to that point has been pretty mad, you know, on the move all the time, you know, go from a slave to a bandit, like, and so he really struggles. And there's this wonderful story of some robbers attack him in in his, like, cell,
right,
you know, where you're praying and sleeping and stuff. So he's attacked by these robbers, but he beats them up, ties them up, and drags them to the monastery's chapel for judgment, and says to all the other brothers, "I don't think it's right that we are supposed to hurt people. So
what do I do?"
And they're like, "Yeah, you're right." And so these robbers are let go, and they decide to join the monastery as well.
The composition of the monastery has radically changed quite quickly. Then, like, you got a lot of
exactly. But, like, the whole time he's, like, really struggling with, like, perfectionism. Basically, you know, he's really struggling with the transition. And the abbot of the monastery takes him up onto a roof at, like, before dawn, and waits to watch the first, like, sun rays appearing over the mountains or hills or whatever, and basically says to him, you know, you're not going to become perfect overnight. It takes a lifetime of and that's what he does, and he becomes someone who is, you know, eventually kind of known for taking things seriously, taking the kind of idea of Christian hospitality, and in fact there's a cultural thing more broadly in the region, still is, of hospitality, very seriously. Another story that he of what he did, he was called along with a bunch of other monks to come and pass judgment for a monk who had, like, sinned, who had broken some rule. And he kept refusing to go. And then eventually he goes, but he carries some stories say a jug with water in it, and some stories say a jug with sand in it, but there's a little hole in the bottom, and he comes in with all this water or sand pouring behind him, and they're like, what are you doing? And he said, my sins run out behind me and I do not see them, but today I'm coming to judge the errors of another. And then they forgave the monk who had erred. And eventually he becomes the abbot of the monastery himself. And at the age of 75, the monastery is attacked by a sort of roving group of presumably kind of bandits like he used to be, who were apparently Berbers in origin. So, I'm not sure why that matters, but that's what.
You're doing that thing that old people do, where they are telling a story and they unnecessarily mention the race of everyone involved in the story.
Well, it's because all the stories, that's what they say. Some Berbers came to attack, and he basically tells almost all the monks, to run away. They're like, we should defend the monastery. And he's like, no, run away. And they do, but 7 of them stay back with him. Now, I had heard stories where they did actually try and fight them off, but I don't think that's the case. Most stories say that basically they kind of held them off, or
bought time or
whatever, and accepted their martyrdom, and that's how he died. But yeah, the whole thing being, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And so he'd kind of finally learnt his...
There's an element of I can see poetic justice coming for me then, is that?
Yeah. But he's now considered, I think, in the Orthodox churches to be the patron saint of non-violence, which is pretty cool. A bit
of violence.
But he, also, I haven't really said anything about this, but he was, as I say, all about the hospitality, all about caring for the poor and that kind of thing. Rejected money, and obviously lived in community, and that's how I'm justifying him being Saint of the Week on a leftist Christian podcast. So there
mainly because you wanted to talk about his name and how cool it is.
Yeah, totally. And his life is rad, So yeah, that is my Saint of the Week this week, St. Moses the Black.
Saint of the Week. Thank you very much for that. From a saint to whatever you want to call the Evangelical Alliance. Sinners? I guess they probably say we're all sinners, so that's fine. I want to talk a little bit about what they actually do, our friends at the Evangelical Alliance. And there's 2 kind of big things they do. They do campaigning and they do resourcing. So campaigning, don't read this bit ahead of time, Adam, if you're on the notes. They helped set up one of the main anti-abortion campaigns in the kind of it was a referendum, wasn't it, in occupied Ireland about abortion rights. That they were one of the people who kind of helped set up one of the main oppositions, and then kind of folded it into their thing and kind of broadened it to the whole of the UK, a movement opposing abortion rights. Do you know what the name of the organisation was?
Okay, so hang on. This organisation did what?
They were the opposition.
Because I don't. By the way, I could be wrong. I don't think it was a referendum. I think it was basically imposed from central government, because there was occupied Ireland, as you may know, had a long period recently of having no devolved government meeting because they couldn't agree. And so the UK government took control of a lot of things. And one of the things they brought in was abortion rights. If I remember rightly, that's just off the top of my head. Could be wrong. But yeah, anyway, this organisation.
Yeah, it was 2019, wasn't it? Did it? It wasn't a referendum, was it not?
Yeah.
It was just a...
I don't think so. I think it was imposed from on high.
But it was
a few times hierarchy has done something good.
So they're involved in the campaign against abortion rights in occupied Ireland. Would you like to guess what the name of that organisation was, or the campaign was?
Is it? Am I going to know them? Are they?
Probably not. It is an eye-wateringly bad name.
Okay. Is it? It's going to be something awful like campaign against dead babies or something.
It was, and it was stylized with a hashtag both lives matter. Yeah, that's right, baby. They were riffing off Black Lives Matter for an anti-abortion campaign. They have renamed it Both Lives now because they obviously recognise that was a really stupid.
I have come across. I did see this in the in my research as well, but I had completely forgotten that was the
tagline for the campaign: pro-women and pro-life.
Yeah, I bet that their actual policy positions
deeply anti-women,
kind of not pro-women.
Yeah. So they were obviously, as you would expect, quite heavily involved in the opposition to the assisted dying bill recently. They've stuck their oar into the debate around safeguarding. They did quite a lot of contributions to ISCA, the Independent Inquiry into Safeguarding and Child Abuse.
They probably needed to, didn't they?
Well, but they've also pushed back against the term spiritual abuse because they're
I've seen that. Yeah.
Love
a bit of conversion therapy, don't they? I saw an interview with
but yes.
Guys.
Interestingly, the spiritual abuse thing that came out of their theological advisory group, it's one of the things that they're not open about at all is who's on their theological advisory group. There's some bloke who heads them up that I don't know at all, but you cannot find the names of the people on the theological advisory group. I have looked extensively. Everything else, it's like here's the council, here's the trustees, here's the staff, here's a bit about whatever. They don't tell you who's on the theological advisory group. But anyway, they do a lot of critical campaigning. They talk in their annual report about kind of submissions they've made to the government, particularly in like government consultations. It's a bunch of photos of the CEO at number 10, and loads of meetings with like politicians, stakeholders, civil servants, whatever. Kind of a political lobbying group in all but name. And they're quite disingenuous about what language they use. They talk about like protecting freedom and promoting better relationships and sex education and protecting the vulnerable because we should be allowed to do conversion therapy. We should not allow gay people, or abortion is not as like, doesn't have a compelling sound to it in the same way. Like, the other thing they do, and they're very good at, is do loads of media work. Like, if media organizations want a kind of evangelical or even just religious voice, they make it really easy to just be the kind of go-to organization.
Where have we seen that before? I mean, that is just a very common thing with these kinds of organizations, isn't it? And the thing is as well, I've seen them do interviews on things that like, you're thinking, why are you on here? Like, why is this even something that you're getting like someone from a specifically Christian organization? Like,
and they're just trying to find ways of making themselves more legitimate, really. Like, get used to the idea that we should be involved in every conversation and every debate, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. Which I think I've listened to a few of their podcasts, and I think sometimes they come across as pretty. I mean, we've said already that they're basically a sort of fairly fundamentally liberal organization. Mm-hmm. But sometimes some of them come across as pretty measured in certain ways, and I'm sure they are in certain ways. But actually, again, that is one of those things where you're acquiescing to a system, you're not properly questioning it.
Yes.
So I did see them, to their credit, talk about the problems involving people like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, that kind of thing. But there wasn't the underlying critique of what I would argue starts with capitalism, because the the politics flows from the economics, right?
Yeah.
And don't really get that with them at all.
Yeah. So I think we'll get onto that a little bit in a moment, but let me just tell you about the resourcing they do, because I think that's a really important thing that they do. So essentially, they create loads of like high quality, well produced resources that are really easy to access, and they're often cheap or free, and they're kind of designed to look very balanced resources to start the conversation. And they're very like, the whole marketing behind it is like, this is a conversation starter. This is a way of opening up these really important discussions about stuff, while actually they're pushing a very specific agenda but in a way that makes you feel like you're having a conversation, which again is a really liberal kind of way of discourse, actually.
It's very alpha course, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of it. Yeah, they're not unrelated to that world.
Yeah.
But just more generally, that kind of, we're going to have rational conversations, quietly together without getting annoyed. None of this really affects us on any personal level. We're just having conversations to increase our understanding of the situation. They'd like to go for like big hot button topics that are like getting some things. Like there's one video series they did around the loneliness epidemic, which is a big thing. Again, you and I would say, I'll tell you what the problem is. Capitalism. The problem actually is lack of Jesus. And these things kind of look like bog standard.
I mean, yeah.
But only if Jesus is anti-capitalism, like.
Well, Jesus is not capitalism, right? Yeah. I mean, we live at a what I would say is an economic system that seriously needs Jesus. So I'm going to agree with them on this one. I'm going to give them this one, Ben.
The stuff is designed to look like kind of bog standard self-help stuff, or that kind of like pop psychology, kind of that sort of thing. Like, we're going to do some really like social theory or whatever, but they're actually like evangelistic tools. And I think this is true of a lot of kind of evangelistic stuff, evangelism in general.
Yeah.
Yes, they'd like to convert non-believers, but actually it also does a really important thing in terms of like reminding believers what they're meant to believe, really like reinforcing those boundaries again. And I think even stuff we think, this is aimed at people outside, the majority of people watching this stuff are already evangelicals. It's just like a reminder of, this is how things are meant to be. This is what you're meant to think and believe.
Yeah.
There's a course on relationships they do. Really classic stuff.
Of course there is, yeah.
Advertised as like really important conversations about narratives around relationships and sex, all this sort of like stuff. But actually it's just pushing this very specific agenda. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with pushing a very specific agenda. That is very much what this podcast does. As long as it's
our one, yeah.
or let's go even simpler than that. Like, maybe just be honest about that. Like, no one is listening to this podcast not realizing that we have a viewpoint that we're trying to argue for, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with pushing your agenda, but actually the way they do it is meant to hide what they're doing. It's dishonest, is what it is.
It is, and I think that's one of the things that I always want to be very clear about. It's this. I mean, it's that liberal idea again, actually, of not having, of being without an ideology. Actually, I'm not ideological.
Yes.
Like, yes, you are. There's nothing more ideological than saying you're not ideological. And I think for me, I'm always very clear that I'm ideological. Everyone is ideological. Our podcast is, as you've said it before, an Islamo-Marxist podcast.
Yeah.
And that's the ideology that we're coming from, and we're very open about that.
Yeah, absolutely. They send loads of people to speak at churches, loads of resources for courses, small groups, things using services. It's all ways of like reinforcing this is what you should think, this is what the reality is. And actually, even if you're not like an evangelical or particularly conservative church, if you're looking for a resource, the easiest, cheapest, and best looking stuff is often the Evangelical Alliance stuff. So you end up just grabbing it because that's what's there. And
this is some PragerU shit, isn't it?
Yeah,
like that's the equivalent. Like,
100%. Like, just a quote from the relationships course to finish off this segment that I think you'll like.
Love it.
Jesus, the original sexual revolutionary. That's right. Those 60s hippies, they were really following in the footsteps of Jesus.
To be fair, there is the Jesus people movement, so
Yeah, let's not talk about them. That is not worth getting. So, apart from the fact that we don't like them, I think they're bad. Why are we talking about them? I think you've talked about this a lot and said they're a liberal organisation, but I want to talk about, you kind of said about politics flow from economics. And, Marxists talk about base and superstructure. So you have your economic base, and you have the superstructure of ideology, society, government, church, all this stuff that grows up around it. And those two things are really heavily interrelated. The base gives rise to the superstructure, but then the superstructure allows the base to continue happening as it happens. This is, materialist analysis, Marxist 101. And I think we understand Evangelical Alliance to be part of that superstructure. And it's easy to look at them and go, well, they're pushing against liberal ideas about acceptance of queer people, about liberalization of abortion, about, religion not being allowed to kind of dominate a society and a culture. But ultimately, the work they do, and I don't think they know this, upholds neoliberal capitalism. That's what it does. And sometimes I think, man, when we say this stuff, are we reaching? Are we overselling the case? And then I found this on their website from the history section. The Evangelical Alliance during the interwar years. The rise in communism across Europe after World War I was seen as a great threat by evangelicals during the interwar years, with the Evangelical Alliance taking a lead in supporting Christians around the continent. They explicitly describe their history as an anti-communist organization.
Yeah.
You just kind of, often we have to be like, well, actually, really what this organization does is promote capitalism. And then it's like, oh yeah, and they put on their website that they were fighting communism.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty explicit, isn't it? I mean, I respect that. Do you know what I mean? Again, that is one of those few kind of, well, it's not really so much kind of being upfront about your ideological commitments as just being a mask off moment. You know?
And I think, really what we're saying is the stuff around their social views, and that's really important, right? Those social views are bad and they cause suffering to people, and we oppose them. But by espousing those social views and, creating that quote unquote debate, what they are doing is creating the illusion of choice, of debate, of real conversation.
Yeah.
While actually the fundamental economic base and the capitalist structure of society remains untouched. It's that whole thing about, you've got Labour versus Conservatives, but ultimately whoever's in power, they're going to continue to uphold neoliberal capitalism. The debate is not unimportant. It's not that it doesn't matter. Important things happen there. There are better choices and worse choices, but they fundamentally agree on the structure of society and the economy.
Yeah.
Which is why we can call the Evangelical Alliance a liberal organisation.
It's one of those things where it's very frustrating. Like if I sort of clip bits of this podcast and put them on social media for people to see or whatever, I'm always really careful about which bits I clip in terms of using the word liberal, because it's just a word that people fundamentally misunderstand.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get it. And on some level, you could say, oh, well, all right, language is reflective of its use. A definition is descriptive, not prescriptive. Fine. I think that's true. But the thing is, we see so often a misappropriation, just an appropriation,
mm-hmm.
especially of leftist kind of terms and of political terms to suit the ideological positions of liberal capitalists. And actually, I think sometimes there are definitions that we need to fight for.
Yeah. And under that definition of liberalism, and I don't think the Evangelical Alliance intends this, but what you see is capitalism using things, right? I think it's really interesting with all the campaigning they're doing, political lobbying, all the resourcing or whatever. I don't see anything about economics on their website. And that's partially, arguably, because they have like charity wings or whatever. But I just think it's not a focus for them.
No, of course
the society they want.
They've assumed they've assumed the way things are as the way things should be.
And I think there's an argument for absence there, right? There is a if they are saying we hate that abortion is legalized, we hate the acceptance of homosexuality, all this stuff that is, bad and wrong and all the rest of it, but they're not saying, and we hate that people are exploited at work, and we hate that workers at the front lines are being horribly underpaid, we hate that landlords are ripping people off. Well, then you're probably okay with that stuff because you're not afraid to take political positions that are controversial, that are against the flow of things. So if you're not prepared to say all that stuff, it kind of suggests, that stuff's all fine. The really important stuff is whether gay people get to get married, whether women are allowed to make choices over their own bodies, whether people are allowed to have the bodily autonomy of assisted dying. Like, those are the things that really matter, because the underlying economic structure, maybe we could do a little bit more for the poor or be nicer to immigrants, but basically it's fine.
Yeah.
And they don't say that. That's not the message. But the fact that they have nothing to say on economic issues basically at all, whilst being essentially a political lobbying organisation when you get down to it reinforces that all you can do is tinker around with social choices. You can't change the economic system.
Yeah. Which is not to say that they never talk about money or wealth or anything like that. It's just that 9 times out of 10, it's going to be for a very, very kind of liberal capitalist lens, and often of.
Although I have to say, actually, they, I'm sure they have some resources around wealth and money or whatever, but it's really so not a focus for them. There is so
no, it's
little.
Really not. It's not. Look, they've got stories where they talk about things like money and debt and that kind of thing. But it's
which you mean they've got a lot of resources reflect on David Graeber's. It's a really weird fascination for them.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. No, but it's this thing that we see with Christians Against Poverty, right? Where debt is definitely seen as a bad thing, but you still have the Christian responsibility to pay off your debt, that kind of thing. So they talk about money a bit, but they have no real concern with, again, it's a base and superstructure thing, really. They are fundamentally more concerned with culture as opposed to economics.
Yeah. And I don't want anyone to think that we're saying it's not important that abortion rights are protected, that queer people have the same rights as everyone else has. These are important things. These are things we should fight for. However, we should also recognise that these things are also rooted in economic structures, and that the way we fight them should be in the larger structure of also fighting against capitalism. So, yes, we should support abortion rights. We should support the queer community. We should, and this might be controversial because this one always gets people, but we should support assisted dying because bodily autonomy is a basic leftist principle. Sorry.
I just thought I'd cover both bases.
Yeah. We might talk about that at more length, but be a leftist and support bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
But we should be being involved in these fights, but we should be doing it within the broader structure of fighting capitalism. So we should be approaching these things from a specifically leftist approach. And that means not just going, oh, these guys are assholes, they suck, but also saying capitalism sucks, these guys uphold it, and they've got some abhorrent social views as well. So I think that is probably all we have time for today. one thing we didn't talk about is the deep involvement in evangelicalism and the Evangelical Alliance in colonialism. We did not have the time to really delve into that huge subject. That's obviously a huge part of the story, and we might deal with that at another point, but not today. Thank you very much for listening to us. We are back. We're very happy to be back for season 6, 2025, the year that the prophecy about bread and rosaries will be fulfilled. You can find Bread and Rosaries at breadandrosaries.com. We have a Patreon. We have all sorts of internet accounts, podcast feeds in the usual podcast feed places. Please rate and review us if you'd like to give us a hand. It helps us get in front of people. Adam, where in the world can people find you?
You can find me in many different places, TikTok and newly on Blue Sky now as well, since that's where everyone seems to be going to escape the fascist hellscape that is Twitter, at CommieXIAN.
Brilliant. Get in contact with us as well. We'd love to hear from people, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Adam.